Hannah had always been a lover of nature. The scent of pine, the rustling of leaves, and the way sunlight filtered through the trees brought her a peace she hadn't known in the city. When she moved into her new home, nestled at the edge of a tranquil neighborhood with her backyard leading directly into a sprawling forest, it felt like a dream come true. The house was quaint and cozy, with large windows that invited the outside in and a porch that overlooked the dense woods. Working remotely, Hannah cherished the solitude, the quiet that allowed her to focus, and the daily connection with nature. Each day, she would finish work and eagerly lace up her running shoes, heading out into the forest trails for her afternoon jog. The forest quickly became her sanctuary, a place where she felt free and alive. The soft earth beneath her feet, the chirping of birds, and the rustling leaves were a melody that made her forget the troubles of her previous city life. One evening, after a long day, Hannah decided to run some errands. She drove to the nearby grocery store, filling her cart with fruits, vegetables, and other essentials. The drive back was peaceful, the familiar sight of towering trees on either side of the road welcoming her back to her sanctuary. But as she pulled into her driveway and stepped out of the car, something unusual caught her eye. A small, pink envelope lay on the doormat, almost blending in with the fading light of dusk. Curiosity piqued. Hannah picked it up. Her name was written on it in neat, delicate handwriting. Inside, she found a simple card with a message, "You are more beautiful than the sunrise in the forest." A small smile tugged at her lips, thinking it might be from a friendly neighbor, a welcoming gesture of sorts. Yet, as she looked around, there was no one in sight. The street was empty, the shadows from the trees stretching long as night began to fall. Shaking off the odd feeling that crept up her spine, she slipped the card into her pocket and stepped inside, locking the door behind her. The card lingered in her thoughts, but she tried to brush it off, convincing herself it was nothing more than a kind gesture from a secret admirer. After all, the neighborhood seemed friendly enough, and she had exchanged pleasantries with a few neighbors, though she didn't know many people by name. Days turned into weeks, and the routine continued. Work, job, rest. But the card wasn't the only thing that started to unsettle her. She began to notice subtle changes in her surroundings. The feeling of being watched during her jogs grew stronger. The shadows in the forest seemed to move with her, and occasionally she thought she saw something or someone lurking just out of sight. But whenever she turned to look, there was nothing there, only the trees and the silence of the forest. Hannah tried to ignore it, attributing it to her imagination, but the unease gnawed at her. One evening, after a particularly long day, she received a notification on her phone. It was a message request on Instagram from an account she didn't recognize. The profile picture was blurry, and the username was a random string of letters and numbers. She hesitated, her finger hovering over the accept button, before curiosity got the better of her. The message was simple. "You looked beautiful on your jog today." Hannah's heart skipped a beat. She quickly tapped on the profile, and what she found made her blood run cold. The account was filled with pictures of her, jogging along the trails, shopping at the grocery store, sitting on her porch with her laptop. Each photo was taken without her knowledge, and each was captioned with unsettlingly affectionate comments. "Such grace, the forest goddess, mine." Her hands trembled as she typed out a response. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply was almost immediate. "To be close to you. To protect you." A wave of nausea washed over her as she stared at the screen. The peaceful existence she had carved out for herself in this quiet neighborhood suddenly felt like a fragile illusion. She quickly blocked the account and reported it to Instagram, but the damage was done. The sense of security she once felt was shattered, replaced by a growing fear. She stopped jogging altogether, choosing instead to stay indoors with her curtains drawn. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside sent her into a state of heightened alert. The once comforting sounds of nature now felt menacing, as though the forest itself was conspiring against her. A week passed, and the messages ceased. The silence, however, only deepened her anxiety. The absence of contact from the stalker felt ominous, as if he was waiting, biding his time. She kept the lights on at night, double-checked the locks on her doors and windows, and tried to convince herself that it was over, that whoever it was had moved on. But the fear never truly left. It lingered, a shadow at the back of her mind. One morning, after a particularly restless night, Hannah found herself unable to resist the urge to check the blocked account. She unblocked it and opened the profile, her heart racing. New posts had appeared. They were different from the previous photos. These were taken at night, from inside her bedroom. She stared at the images in horror. They showed her sleeping, her body curled under the blankets, the soft rise and fall of her breath visible in the dim light. The final post was a video, a slow, unsettling pan across her sleeping form, the camera moving from her face to the window, where it lingered as if to show the view from where the stalker had stood. Hannah's blood turned to ice. How had someone gotten inside her house? How had she slept through it all? She immediately called the police, her voice shaking as she explained the situation. They arrived quickly, but once again, the account had been deleted before they could trace it. With no evidence to go on, they could do little more than reassure her that they would increase patrols in the area. Feeling utterly helpless, Hannah turned to the only person she thought might be able to help, her neighbor, Mark. Mark was a quiet, unassuming man in his mid-30s who lived a few houses down. They had spoken a few times since she moved in, mostly in passing, but he always struck her as kind and reliable. He seemed genuinely concerned when she confided in him about the stalker. "That's terrifying," he said, his brow furrowed with concern. "I can't believe someone would do this to you. If you need anything at all, you can call me, day or night. I'll keep an eye out. Make sure you're safe." Grateful for his support, Hannah took his number and thanked him, feeling a small measure of relief for the first time in days. Mark's calm demeanor and willingness to help gave her hope that she could get through this. With him nearby, she felt a little less alone in her fear. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every noise, every shadow seemed to carry a threat. But eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she fell into a fitful sleep. It was in the early hours of the morning when she was jolted awake. She wasn't sure what had woken her, a noise, a feeling. But as she lay there, heart pounding, she became aware of a presence in the room. Her eyes darted to the window, but it was closed, the curtains drawn. Slowly, she sat up, her breath caught in her throat. And then she saw him, a figure dressed in black, standing in the corner of her room, watching her. For a moment, she was frozen in terror. The figure moved slightly, and in the faint light, she saw the glint of eyes beneath the hood. Before she could scream, the figure bolted, darting towards the window. In a flash, he was gone, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. Hannah leaped out of bed, slamming the window shut, locking it with trembling hands. She backed away, her mind racing, trying to process what had just happened. She grabbed her phone and frantically called Mark. Her voice was barely coherent as she told him someone had been in her room. Mark arrived within minutes, finding her huddled in the living room, her body shaking uncontrollably. He pulled her into a comforting embrace as she sobbed against his chest. "It's okay," he murmured, his voice steady and calm. "You're safe now, Hannah. I'm here." The police were called again, but once more there was little they could do. The intruder had left no trace, no evidence. They promised to keep a closer watch on the area, but their assurances did little to ease Hannah's fear. Mark insisted on staying with her that night, sitting on the couch while she tried to sleep. The next morning, he took charge, changing all the locks on her doors and windows, adding extra security measures to ensure she felt safe. His presence was a comfort, his actions filled with genuine concern and care. For a while, it seemed to work. Hannah began to feel safer, the terror that had gripped her slowly loosening its hold. The forest, though still imposing, didn't seem as menacing with Mark around. She started to believe that maybe things were getting back to normal, that maybe the worst was over. But then, late one night, everything changed. Hannah had finally managed to fall asleep, the tension in her body easing slightly as the hours passed. But then she felt it, a light touch, fingers brushing against her feet. Her mind was slow to process, still caught in the fog of sleep. But when she finally understood what was happening, her eyes snapped open. Mark was sitting at the foot of her bed, his hand resting lightly on her ankle, a twisted smile on his face. Panic surged through her, her heart pounding in her chest. She kicked out, catching him off guard, and scrambled out of bed. He lunged for her, but she was quicker, adrenaline propelling her forward. She slammed the door shut behind her, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the lock. "Mark, what are you doing?" she screamed, her voice breaking. But Mark's voice was eerily calm, almost tender. "Hannah, don't run. I'm just trying to protect you. You're safe with me, remember?" Terrified, she didn't waste a second. She sprinted down the stairs, heading for the front door. But as she struggled with the lock, she heard him coming down the stairs after her, his footsteps slow, deliberate. "You don't have to be afraid, Hannah," he called after her. "I've always been watching out for you." She yanked the door open just as he reached her. His hand grabbed her arm, trying to pull her back, but she fought with everything she had. Her fear gave her strength, and with a desperate twist, she broke free and ran. The night swallowed her as she plunged into the forest, her feet pounding the earth, branches whipping at her face. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to get away. The trees closed in around her, the darkness pressing in from all sides. Behind her, she could hear Mark's voice, calm, taunting. "Hannah, you know I'll find you. I've always found you. You can't hide from me." She didn't stop, couldn't stop. She pushed deeper into the woods, the branches tearing at her skin, the cold air burning her lungs. She could hear him getting closer, his footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Her heart pounded in her ears, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She couldn't outrun him forever. She needed to hide, to find a place where he couldn't reach her. She spotted a dense thicket of bushes and dove into it, curling up into a ball, her body trembling with fear. She held her breath, praying he wouldn't find her. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of her racing heart. She could hear Mark's footsteps nearby, the soft crunch of leaves as he searched for her. "Come out, Hannah," he called, his voice gentle, coaxing. "You know I would never hurt you. I just want to be close to you. We're meant to be together." Tears streamed down her face as she tried to stay as still and quiet as possible. The fear was suffocating, crushing her chest as she listened to him moving through the trees. He was close, too close. The footsteps paused, and she could feel him standing just outside the bushes, the air thick with tension. She squeezed her eyes shut, willing herself to disappear, to become invisible. Then, as suddenly as it began, the footsteps retreated. He was moving away, his voice fading into the distance. She didn't move, didn't dare to breathe until she was sure he was gone. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Finally, when she could no longer hear him, she crawled out from her hiding place, her body aching, her mind reeling. She had to escape, had to find help. But the forest felt endless, every tree looking the same, every path leading nowhere. She stumbled through the darkness, her body on the brink of collapse, but she couldn't stop. Eventually, The lights of a distant house came into view. She forced herself to keep going, each step a battle against the exhaustion and fear that threatened to overwhelm her. She pounded on the door, her voice a raw whisper as she pleaded for help. When the door finally opened, she collapsed into the arms of a neighbor, the relief washing over her in waves. But even as she was taken to safety, even as the authorities were called, she knew the nightmare was far from over. Mark had vanished, leaving behind no trace. The police searched his house, the forest, the entire neighborhood, but it was as if he had disappeared into thin air. Hannah was left with nothing but the memory of that night, the terror that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She moved away, far from the forest and the house that had once felt like a dream. But no matter where she went, she could never escape the feeling that she was still being watched, still being hunted. She knew that Mark was out there, somewhere, still waiting, still watching. And she knew, deep down, that he would come back for her. If you enjoyed this story and want more chilling tales like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Stay alert, trust your instincts, and remember, a friendly face doesn't always mean a safe space. Until next time, stay safe and keep your doors locked.